We live in a fast-paced and hectic world where it's easy to feel overwhelmed, stressed, and out of control. How do you manage all the competing pressures without losing sense of yourself? How do you stay focused enough to not only plot a path, but follow it? Welcome to Master Your Life, a show that offers inspiration, insight, and intelligence, as well as success stories from many walks of life that can show you how you can control your own destiny. Our knowledgeable and entertaining host and her guests give practical advice that you can use every day in the quest to master your life. Now, here's your host, Leaha Mattinson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. I'm host Leaha Mattinson, and thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in from wherever it is that you are on this wonderful planet. Really appreciate the likes, the shares. We're over 330,000 downloads a month now, and it's all because of you. So for those of you who are tuning in for more insight, intelligence, and inspiration, it's my absolute delight to welcome back to the show, Dr. Howard Rankin. Howard, how are you today?
I am great. Thank you so much, Leaha, for inviting me on to your awesome show.
Well, thank you for agreeing to come on such short notice. You know, I've been, Howard and I worked together at the start of this podcast for a few years. And so he really was a big help in getting the show off the ground. And Dr. David Hardy, who's been in the co-host chair now for many weeks, mostly on Recovery Road, posted this week on his LinkedIn a really important post about men's mental health. And Dr. Dave is taking a couple of weeks off, but I reached out to Dr. Rankin because I thought I actually want to talk about this subject with a man, because I think it's really important that I, as a woman, and I'm a mother, I was a daughter, I was a wife, you know, and I'm now a grandmother to these little boys, that things happen to men that it's important to actually highlight and talk about, especially in terms of mental health and mental wellness. And Howard and I have had many discussions about mental health and wellness over this last 6+ years. And he's an expert in, you know, helping people to recover and redeem themselves. So stay tuned for this episode. For those of you who are listening on the podcast version, please come over to the masteryourlife.ca website so you can watch the video version and see Howard and his great hairdo today. Howard, thanks for doing your hair today. It's looking lovely.
Yes.
So let's dive right in. Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Let's dive right in and talk about what is mental health, what is men's mental health, and what are some of the current stats that tells us maybe we ought to be concerned about it or thinking about this subject.
Yes. Well, the stats are that generally people, particularly younger people's mental health is in a downward spiral. I do some work with Sapiens Labs, and they do a mental health report of the world. Really interesting stuff. You can find it at sapien, SAPIEN labs.org. And their recent report showed that in the 18 to 24-year-old group, almost half of them said they were either very stressed or distressed. Generally, I'm specifically relating to what we call their social self, their ability, you know, to be confident, to interact, a lot of doubt, guilt. And if you think about that, almost half of that age group, you know, from 34 different countries are saying, I'm stressed out, obsessed, not sure how to behave, a lot of comparison anxiety that actually happens almost as much amongst men as it does amongst women. You might think, oh, well, females are going to be more anxious. Comparison by seeing one of their friends looking great and getting all these wonderful comments on Facebook. But actually it happens to men as well. Mm-hmm. So we live at a time, and we can talk about the influences on that, where mental health for both men and women is not good, for sure.
And so what is the, what about loneliness? How does loneliness play into this?
That's huge. It's huge. We know the devastating effect of isolation at any age, The research is, if you're isolated, it isn't just about, oh, you don't have fun or what have you. That reverberates in your mind, body in many different ways. Social stimulation for us is really critical. We don't realize that, but just imagine what goes on in a typical conversation, like with a friend. First of all, you've got to assess, their nonverbal, what mood are they in? You have to work that out. What are they saying? How are you going to think about that? Think about relevant experiences, relate to them, follow them. Now, there's a lot of things that go into a good social interaction. One of the things we found is that virtual interaction is not anywhere near the same as social interaction. And so one of the concerns is that this particular age group that grew up literally from day one in an internet-enabled tech world spend way too much time in virtual interaction that does not teach them the skills they need, which you only get or primarily get from real life interaction. And so one of the things we're seeing is this internet generation being socially behind. In fact, one of the researchers worked out that given the amount of time that an average, 18 to 24-year-old has spent in real life communication today compared to people before the internet, 18-year-olds today probably have the social capacity of a 10-year-old before the internet.
That's a very interesting observation. I was just out for coffee in the real world. Right? I know, it was surprising for me too, Howard. But I was out for coffee with a gentleman last week, and he was talking about that his son, who's in this age group, that really, he's been pretty athletic. So that's been a good thing, but that their predominant thought in that age group around 23, he said, it's all about envy. It's all about jealousy, money, and what the other person has. I'm like, what? That's very, how different than our experience, So I said, are you sure? And he goes, yeah, I'm sure, because the career that he's picking is going to be X, and it's because he's been so highly influenced by just the desire for money, that because that's what he sees playing on his screen all the time, that there's very little about, who are the human beings on the other end of your money train, and that he was concerned for the moral sort of development of his son, even though he says, his son's really athletic, a great player, like a, good guy, wants him to be good. But he said, no, I can see that actually his life is about envy. Like, that's frightening.
Yeah, it is. And he said, his son sounds like a pretty adaptable kid, but I think he's a reflection of the impact of the things we've been talking about, particularly the internet. So he reaches this age now, he's sort of growing into independence, but he doesn't have a compass. He doesn't even have one of the things about social interaction, it forms your view of yourself. And if you have inadequate interaction, you don't know. You're concerned. Am I good enough? Am I this? Am I that? And we see a lot of that in these surveys. And so that's tragic, actually. That's really tragic, because those relationships, those real life interactions, are essential for the development of ourselves as well as our relationships with other people.
Right.
And isolation, in that sense, can be devastating. And a lot of people think about isolation of older people who are living on their own, and it's absolutely devastating for them, but it can be equally devastating for a 21-year-old or a young adult. I know a young man who was a really smart guy, sociable, and then he really got into gaming and all this stuff, and now he has a job, a pretty good job, but he is almost a loner.
Yeah, and what kind of life is that? Because they're it's just quite something else, isn't it? Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I have a 24 and 25-year-old, so they're 18 months apart. So they're right in this age group. But when we were younger, maybe that's been a good thing that because we have a neurological disease in the family, I was very well informed about what that internet or that constant sort of TV feeding of the brain did. And so when my kids came to me when they're 13, 14 and wanted to play video games, I said no. And they all, they were mad at me. It's like, oh, I was the worst mom on the planet. And I said, well, get your longboard out and go. We were living in the city at that time, but yeah, I said, get your longboard out and see if you can get any of them to go, any of your friends to come out and have a pop with you or something down the street. And so they would go and do that. But as soon as they had the drink in their hand, they would be down in their basements again, playing whatever, avatar game. And, my kids sitting on the front porch crying that they didn't have any friends. And I said, well, we'll have to go learn some real world stuff because I'm not caving on this, So, yeah, I wasn't a very popular mother for quite some time, but I can see the benefit of that now because of where they're at in their development of friends, like a friend group. They're pretty confident young people. And I think that the brain still has a hope of being rewired, when we're kids or when we're younger. So what do you think about that for this age group, the 18 to 25-year-olds? Can they rewire their brain, or are they so wired into the internet and the internet of things that they're going to be stuck there?
You can rewire your brain. There's no question about that. Obviously, it's easier when you're younger, when you're forming those patterns. The thing about it is it takes a long time. The sort of conventional wisdom, and what we're talking about here is doing an action or a set of actions repeatedly so that the brain connections and the patterns and develop new pathways. And the conventional wisdom, it takes 10,000 hours to, develop a skill. And it may be that amount of time that's taken by doing something different, like actually doing real life interaction, to change it. So it can be changed, but it's a lot of work and it's not going to happen overnight. And the first thing is, boy, I need to do more of this, in this case, real life interaction. Yeah. So it's possible, but, it just takes time. I mean, I remember, this is slightly different, but when I was a teenager, I realized my boundaries weren't very good. I was being a bit too nice and inclusive. And even though I realized that at, maybe 16, it still took me probably 15 years to actually change that around, So you can change. It just takes work.
Yes. And I, with the mental health aspect of things too, Howard, the formation of sort of moral boundaries or boundaries for yourself is really, I think, influenced by the mentors that you have as well. So if you've got good mentors, that's one thing. But if your whole mentorship is in the avatar world of things, it's very hard that's not real life, So if you're, it's like I'm trying to pull out of the sky who the mentors are, but going right. Who are they? And, why? And also the instant gratification of, doing anything on the internet. It's like, whatever, Candy Crush. It's the one that comes to my mind because so many people were on it. I'm just like, holy mackerel. Okay, then. But so it's like in the real world, it takes time to develop relationships, to even when you're little, just to kind of figure out where things are at in terms of the people who are outside of you. But then the important aspect in mental health, physical health, social health, around who are your mentors, and are they mentors that deserve to actually have your respect and your eye?
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I do think mentors, the right mentors, of course, are hugely valuable. Hugely valuable growing up. I mean, you could have the best parents in the world, awesome parents, and that's great. But it's also good to have slightly different perspectives from different mentors. James, my son, had a lot of good mentors growing up, and we think we did a great job with him. But part of that was exposing him to other people, and he could develop those solid, good positive relationships with them.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's undoubtedly been massive. Even though, he had good parents, that's great. And that sets the scene. But as you grow, you do need other people, ideally. So we had, the guy at the Boy Scouts, a guy in the ROTC, the priest at the church. He had 4 or 5 people that he really made great friends with and were very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was very fortunate. I think also a really bad example can also be a good example too. I was thinking about they're going, oh, it's got to be all these great mentors. Sometimes it's absolutely the train wrecks that can be a really good mentor too, because you go, I don't want my life to be like that. I remember my son watching Canada's Worst Driver, and I would just go, oh my gosh, why are you watching that ridiculous show? And he'd go, well, Mom, I'm learning all the things about what not to do very clearly. Like, oh, okay. I hadn't seen that perspective, but I was watching thinking, oh, this is the dumbest thing in the world. But no, it was like, okay, he could rationalize why he was watching it. So it was great. You can discern what that is.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
The other thing you talk about video games.
Mm-hmm.
How many video games are there out there about saving people or stopping violence? I don't believe there's one, because it's not profitable. Right. So not only are these kids watching, they're being trained, the brain's being trained to be violent and shoot people and kill people. And, it's all about survival and very toxic, very toxic. So I don't think that helps either.
Right.
I really don't.
No, I agree. I agree with that, definitely. And so one of the things that struck me on, and maybe this parallels that, one of the things that struck me on Dr. Dave's post was it said men also get abused, and that it's like, so they're playing this tough guy thing when they're playing the video games, but in the real world, they actually haven't learned how to manage their relationships. And part of that happens through early life, like wrestling with your siblings, wrestling with your grandpa, wrestling with, so learning your body strength and your what's that called? It's like, what I'm talking about, Howard. It's like where you actually know your strengths and you can play to your strengths, and you actually develop that body confidence early on.
Right. And again, when you develop something like that, a skill like that, that impacts your view of yourself, that you're capable, you're competent, you can defend yourself. That's important. If you're walking around feeling vulnerable, very vulnerable to that, that's going to influence how you act and think. So these things are all interconnected.
Yes.
And there is, unquestionably, certainly in the US, and I suspect in Canada, but I think to a lesser degree, there is a culture of toxic masculinity, which is crazy. Guys are got to be muscular, and they can do anything they want, and they got to be hard asses, and they got to be a success. And to be a success, you got to be a hard ass. Honestly, I think that's a really damaging message, because I don't think it's true anyway. But secondly, it makes people wonder whether I don't have what it takes, And my view really is the opposite. Vulnerability, for men, vulnerability. Oh my God, can't be vulnerable. Couldn't possibly go to a therapist to talk about my issues. Forget that. Vulnerability actually is a strength. Mm-hmm. It's a strength. But, most men in North America wouldn't want to admit they're vulnerable. Is humility a strength? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. How many people would recognize that? Not too many, because it certainly is not the cultural message that most men are given.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there's a balance in those things where you can be the vulnerable man and the man of integrity and honor, and also to be physically strong. Because I think that's what's being missing also, is that there is this whole cream puff guy now coming out. Right. Really? There's a lot of cream puffs, and they're just going, well, I'm going to be a cream puff. So there's a balance.
Sure, I
mean that literally too, is that the cream puffs are coming out in the physiology of men. younger and younger and younger. So when we look on, I think about, when I was executive coaching and counseling too, one of the things that was just the basis is knowing what's expected of me at work and in life and in my roles. And that's been so undermined, that people really don't know. So there's toxic masculinity, there's narcissism, there's, the labels that people are, again, virtue signaling, which is another label. I just go, the labels upon labels. It's like living in acronym land. But when it comes down to being a human being who's functional, it's like, where is the balance to be mentally and physically healthy? Because you can't spend your whole life off in meditation land either, which is all this out of body. I'm going to be out of bodies. No, you live here in the 3D. You live here on this planet in this 3D body, which is your temple. What are you doing in there? And what's the balance between the hard ass masculine and the sort of, toned down a little bit, and I can hear what's going on internally in me that isn't in alignment.
Right. Yeah. And so I think one way of looking at that is life is about adaptation, right? Stuff happens to all of us. Nobody's perfect. And in fact, if you had the perfect life, you'd be miserable. Okay. Yeah. No, seriously. I had a client when I was still in the UK. I had a client who was actually a really well-known self-help guy, great guy. He came in, he was seriously depressed. He was in his 40s. And, his problem was he just had his first real setback in life. Okay. And there were two problems with that. One, he didn't know how to deal with it because he'd never had no experience. And more importantly, too, he was beating himself up so badly that he had to be admitted to a mental hospital, right? And so life isn't about, it's just wonderful and sail through and then every day's happy. No, it isn't. It's about adaptation. Stuff will always happen. You know that. You've been facing a family disease, for a lot of years now. And it's about how do you adapt to it? And so from my perspective, if you're going to adapt, first of all, you have to look at the situation realistically. Stop making excuses for yourself. Own up. Yeah, I did a stupid thing, right? And, I have this book called Falling to Grace, The Art and Science of Redemption, which talks about a period in my life where I did something stupid and was faced with all of the shame and what have you and how to deal with it. And the default mechanism for most people is to pretend it didn't happen or blame all sorts of other people. The first step is accepting something's happening here. I'm responsible for it, and I'm certainly responsible for fixing it. Now, what am I going to do? Right? And then plan your way. And when you do that, even some of the worst things in your life can turn out to be the greatest blessings. So, it's that mindset of adaptability, which means I've got the strength. I got to be honest. Right? It's based on value. If I'm lying to myself, I'm going to be stuck here. So it is that balance between the heart and the fist almost, where, and it doesn't have to necessarily, when I say fist, mean physical. It could be dealing with all sorts of situations in your life that are challenging, but that's what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah, and the internal wrestling that you went through, I remember it quite clearly, so thanks for putting out that great book. Anyone who wants to get their hands on it can do so. And you can find links to that in the show notes, or you can find it on links to it more on the website as well, masteryourlife.ca, and to Howard. So coming back to this, the internal wrestling that we do around things that are mentally tough, because life is tough. It's always handing us, I say it's like the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 punch, not the one. There it goes. So when you notice, but grieving is such an important part of this too, that we think we can think our way out of everything, and like, I think, therefore I'm wrong. That's such a funny name, right? That's Howard's podcast. So it's like, yes, we think a lot about thinking, but the feeling part,
Absolutely.
and connecting that work that needs to happen in order to be mentally healthy. I don't even know if people know what it means to be mentally healthy.
I'm not sure. I think it's a really good question. And I have to say, Leah, in the recent past, I have definitely moved towards accepting, I think, your view of the world in terms of the mind, body, spirit is there. And that is who we are. But we so often do not access that. We do not appreciate that. And a lot of your life and the things you've done has been helping people, helping them physically, mentally, and understanding them. People just don't get that. They think it's just about their consciousness. Consciousness is overrated, I believe. I believe the mind, body, spirit, these trillions of cells are constantly perceiving things, communicating with each other. 11 million bits of information processed a second, compared to like 30 bits of information a second that we can do consciously. This is constantly doing, and then presents to consciousness. This is our best guess of what's happening. Just because it's conscious, we say, oh, we thought of that. Well, actually, it didn't. It was put in your head. Now, what are you going to do about it? Are you actually going to do anything about it? Or are you just going to let it slide on by?
Right.
And so this mind, body, spirit is unbelievably fascinating, absorbing. There was a great guy I had on my podcast who wrote a book called, John Leaf, who wrote a book called The Secret Language of Cells. And oh my gosh, it is mind-blowing of how these cells communicate. It's incredible. And people don't understand that.
Yeah. And so part of the, for people who are listening, is just to write down a note to yourself if anything has resonated, because things slip so quickly out of our thoughts. And the things that are actually meant for us are things that will, like, you can listen to this whole podcast and there might be like 2 things that you go, oh, that was interesting. Those are the things for you. And then if anything actually gives you goosebumps, it's like noticing what resonates in your body. But we're often so too much on the computers and playing video games and whatever else that's not in the real world, that our body is becoming more and more or less and less sensitive to the things that are actually for us. So when we're talking about this age group of young people who really are, it's almost like being completely disoriented to what the world is supposed to be about. Or the planet. Yep. Sorry for all you flat earthers. But
it would be the same if it was it would be the same if the Earth is flat. Yeah. So
those people, but so for whoever you are, if you're so in tune with your electronics and your computers and your gaming, you've stepped out of the real, like this 3D world, and you can't even hear what is meant for you. And so you go, well, I don't know what to do. I'm very disoriented. It's like somebody put a blindfold on you and you're on a ship and they spin you around 3 times and you're already a little bit seasick, and then you're trying to find your orientation and going, gosh, I just can't ever get my footing, so that's where you can feel really mentally ill, because you feel so disoriented all the time that you don't have your footing. You don't have your ability to navigate your life back onto your path, not a path, your path. And so the Tao Te Ching says it well. It's like the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step.
Yeah.
But if you
actually,
can't
begins with putting your sneakers on, actually. but no, that's true. No, it's true. And that's a major problem. Who am I?
Yes.
In this world? I mean, if you can't define the outside world, how can you define your role in it? And I think that's incredibly disorienting. So because of all of these issues, and certainly more, the mental health of particularly these younger adults and teens even is not doing well. It is not doing well. And actually for the population as a whole. I mean, one of the things, we need to feel that we have some control over our lives. But so many things are happening now that make people doubt that.
Mm-hmm.
They're thrown into anxiety and depression. And, part of that is, the rapid changes that occur. I mean, compared to like 5 years ago, what does work mean to people today? I mean, so many people, that is totally different from what they were doing 5 years ago, which was, Monday to Friday, drive, 9 to 5, drive to work, come home, whatever. It just is not like that anymore.
Yes. And people are not adapted to dealing with that amount of change, to feeling really dislocated. And it's like it's like, I think of like a dislocated shoulder that never heals. Like you're figuring out how to get relocated and reoriented and grounded and rooted in your life is important. And to your point that it's not just the young people, it's, en masse. So when people are looking for mentors and they're young people, say they look out on the horizon, it's like, who's even a mentor that you'd want to follow? Right. Mm-hmm. So that whole, we used to have one or two maybe that you could look to. And maybe this is where, great books come in, or finding, who is it that you want to be? That question. So not just who am I, but who is it you want to be when you're feeling really disoriented? That's a great question. And, do you want to be, somebody that's a superhero in your life? Do you want to be somebody that's just you? Do you want, what is it you want? Do you want success, love, good relationships? Do you want to be physically healthy? Do you want to be somebody that has integrity? I don't even know if people ask themselves that question either.
Well, they should, of course, because I really believe that those virtues and values are core, and that if you're acting really because of those things rather than anything else, like fame, money, whatever, you're going to get derailed. I really believe that. You're going to get derailed. You have to stick with those virtues and values, and you have to say, where is that being taught? Because it's not being taught in the grand society. You look at commercials, just manipulation and lies, a lot of it, right? H.G. Wells said a long time ago, advertising is simply legalized lying. Well, God, if he was around today, he would definitely be saying that. And there's another issue. There was a piece in Forbes that suggested, I guess based on research, that the average person is exposed to at least, in different ways, 5,000 commercials a day. Now, I find that hard to believe, but I don't watch a lot of TV and what have you, but I could see that. And what does that do? What does that do to us? Does it make us cynical? Does it make us, unthinking, or what have you? I don't know the answer to that, but that's another thing. There's bombardment of us in the attention economy, where there's so many people trying to grab your attention. You're rubbernecking your way through life, and where is your intention? Where is your agency? And when we talk about consciousness, we have to make the distinction between awareness and agency, which is you seriously thinking and acting. And a lot of people make that mistake. They say, well, I thought about it. No, they didn't. If something appeared in their head and they accepted it and off it went. No, that's not thinking, really. Okay, it's awareness, but it isn't agency. And so again, we live in this economy where we are bombarded.
Yeah. So the selection process of actually selecting has been hijacked, and we willingly allow it, because once you can't not know. Once you know that you've let things be hijacked, you can't not know it. So there's a lot of effort also put into that, ignoring the things that are meant for us to, do a rally cry within our internal structure and go, I need to do something about this, no matter what anyone else around me is doing, because this is the rally cry for me to improve my life and become more stable and solid. There's we talked years ago about this, the draw and allure of actually being part of groups that are kind of victim-y, because there's such a swell of them. And it's if you belong to whatever group, As long as you're kind of putting in your time with fundraising and whatever else, you're doing your bit. But a lot of them are very much attuned to that whole victim mentality versus that you're going to have agency and do something to rise above your circumstances. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yes, absolutely. And, part of that is the media message is, the ideal media story is some sort of poor victim who's been abused or treated wrongfully by some Hitler-esque devilish character.
Mm-hmm.
And almost every story, ideally, is for the media is cast in that because, oh my gosh, that's the ultimate,
Yes.
story, rather than the hero's journey of somebody overcoming difficulties through their own strengths. And so all that does encourage what is, I think, the default setting for most people if they find themselves, accused of something or doing something, they'll deny it. I mean, every felon I ever met in practice said, well, it wasn't the judge or my lawyer screwed me over or the judge or the what have you. Yeah, and I'd have to say, yeah, but you did walk into a bank with a gun and put it to the,
Right.
But this victim mentality is so damaging, so damaging. It is saying, I'm disempowered. I'm angry and I'm frustrated because you're disempowered. Well, first of all, you may be angry and frustrated, but anger should not drive your actions. Okay? It should not. Okay, I'm mad, somebody treated me unfairly. Okay, what are you going to do about that rather than just stay angry and frustrated? And I do see this so much, politically.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let's throw let's throw hundreds of millions of dollars of negative ads about why that other person is, useless. Nothing to do with why I'm good. Just, that other person is useless. And that is so divisive. It is totally unhelpful. If you have a group that say, oh, you got to believe in us. We're angry and we're mad and we deserve this. You are not converting anyone. You're not. In fact, you're alienating people, So acting on anger and frustration just does not work, actually. Now, I understand you feel it, but you got to move beyond that. But that's what we see driving the cultural narrative. Angry of one group, angry another group, and on we go.
And on we go. And yes, it was surprising to me to see people honestly completely losing it in their vehicles there a couple of years ago. And I was like, what is that person doing? And just over some political thing. And I was like, that's not even your real life at all. And you are, not only are you willing to lose it, but you're willing to videotape yourself doing it. And to play it. I'm thinking I'd be so embarrassed of myself if I actually completely lost it like that. And then you would film it and then you would play it because there's all these conscious choices about what you share also. So,
oh, absolutely.
So the internal mechanism of self-control, I've been very grateful to have to do Qigong, Howard, because that's been a big differentiator in my life. So, and I was athletic for a number of years, which also helped. So when people go, well, what do you actually do to move this stuff? Well, moving your body is a huge one. And if you can't move your body, there's still frequency medicine that's very helpful. I have IteraCare devices that help people to improve their frequency. And so people, again, can find out more about that by coming to the website, masteryourlife.ca, because we have to mind our vibe. We have to mind and that's not some sort of hokey thing. It's an important thing to mind your energy. And we're all just energy, like here in this street, in my opinion, anyway, we're energy. So what is the energy that you're putting out in the world is the energy that you are. So if you've got this, if you're mentally ill or you're hanging out with a bunch of people who are in that victim mentality and they are stuck there, it's like the 5 people that you hang around are the people who you become most. And so whether that's the 5 people that you are watching on TV or the 5 people that you're hanging out with in your real life or the avatars that you're playing, with in virtual reality land, this whole VR thing, I will just share, I haven't shared this before on a podcast, but I decided when that was coming out that I wasn't going to do it because I was too afraid of my brain being scrambled. And I don't think that I'm going to get a second chance around that. So just like ayahuasca, I'm like, I'm not doing that. So lots of people in my field are going, oh, you got to go on these trips. And then I'm like, I am not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Not happening. And
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's only going to get worse, the metaverse. And so talk about confusing and confounding reality with virtual, non-reality. It's just going to get worse. And that's not good. That is not good.
Yes. All I can think is that people, it's like, do you not believe in God? There's got to be some disconnect with actually just God that there's this need to, I don't even know what it is, just jumble up yourself and versus like in Qigong, I can get that high frequency, the feeling of being high. Where people go, they'll go, well, why to go to the ayahuasca ceremonies or why go to all that? Well, because you feel like sparkly and tingly and, they're purging and they're doing all that. And I say, well, I can do that on a Qigong practice. I don't have to, so maybe you should try Qigong. It's like way less expensive and you don't have to, whatever. No, but people they don't know how much power they have over controlling their body. And once you know that, your mental health is quite stabilized. Your mental health is quite stabilized. Your relationship with you take agency. I love that word, such a great word. You take agency over yourself. You're not handing it over to a shaman or a whatever.
Right.
Or a
anyone,
video game graphic designer.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And I absolutely endorse what you're saying about the body. I mean, again, people do not appreciate that. Haven't been told that. It's all about supposedly consciousness and rationality, and it isn't. It isn't. Our mind body, which is subconscious, is managing us, and we need to listen to it. That's the basis of sort of alternative natural therapies. You listen to what the body needs, and it's not a pill. Typically, it's not a pill. And in fact, the evidence is that you take pills for a number of things, and actually that degrades your body's ability over time. Like you take an antidepressant that produces dopamine or whatever the neurotransmitter is, the body's ability to do that is ratcheted down. So you actually makes it worse than if you used other methods. Perhaps you use those just for a short period of time. It makes it worse. Again, your body knows, right? Your body knows, and your body knows what it needs. We've got to discover that and provide that rather than artificial treatments. And I, as I say, have come a long way since you and I were doing podcasts on that, but I totally agree with you.
Yes, and we're certainly not saying that there isn't a place for allopathic medicine. Like if my body is lying open on the street because I've been in a horrific car accident, come on and sew me up. That's awesome. And it's like every time you go in with a complaint or a situation that you're actually, I think we're looking for human interaction to help us resolve. I was commenting, my mom and I were talking yesterday about me going to see a neurologist, and it's kind of this ongoing, should I go, shouldn't I go? Because I go, well, like, what's the value of actually going to see the neurologist? So in families with Huntington's, you often have a neurologist that has been tracking the family for a number of years and sometimes even generations. But I was going, what's the value? I said, I feel like what I would be discussing with the neurologist would be the same things as I would be discussing with my husband if I had one. And so it's like, do I allow the surrogate or do I wait for the real thing? Right. And I just felt I don't need a surrogate. I need the real thing. So just be like, we have these surrogates of the medication, so good friends in the real world, good marriages, good relationships, solid expectations about what's culturally normal, and this why it's so important to have real people in the real world that are your friends and allies, and that people that you can discuss serious things with, because we get off in the weeds thinking we need in our isolation, thinking we need medication to make us feel better. And often we just need another human being.
There you go. There you go. And that also speaks to then at another level of, what that interaction between the patient or you and the doctor is. If you go to see the doctor and he says, come in, okay, well, here are your results, and he's got no connection with you and it's just totally administrative. Screw it. What a waste of time. If you see it and he's understanding and you can relate and he's got some compassion and what have you, that's a different encounter, encounter, Yes. It's like the placebo, if you're given a placebo by somebody who said, yes, take this pill, and you'll, whatever, that's one thing. If you're given a placebo by somebody you trust, you appreciate, probably your reaction to it's going to be quite different, right?
Quite different. Yes, quite different. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Mm-hmm.
So with men, we've just got a couple of minutes left, Howard, for young men or men who are mentors of young men or men who are fathers of boys, of young boys. What do you think would be some really important things to watch out for, things to celebrate when you see them happening, and things to encourage from your perspective?
I think that is real life, genuine, warm, if you want to call it that, but genuine, authentic communication with a variety of people. That's what it's about. Because without that, you can't develop the social skills. We know that the mirror neurons in the brain that are able to look at somebody and say, oh, this is it, I think they're feeling this way, and interpret them is massive. But you do not get that action in a virtual interaction. So real life interaction, as a dad, it would be encouraging as many of those things as possible. So, whether it's scouts or, sports or, any activities like that, real life, particularly team where people can relate and be on this and help each other, those are critical in growing up. There's no question about that. And if you haven't got them by the time you've grown up, then you need to do them even more,
Absolutely.
Because isolation is the worst thing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Dr. Rankin. We're out of time for today, so everyone come check out the podcast at masteryourlife.ca so you can see the show notes, so you can find out how to get Howard's book. And we just love having you on, Howard. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
Thank you. It's always great to speak with you, Leah. So thank you. My pleasure.
Beautiful. All right, everybody. Love yourselves. Love each other. Mind your minds. That's all for us. Bye for now.
Thank you for being a part of our program today. Master Your Life is a presentation of Leaha Mattinson Enterprises, Inc. Join us next time on Master Your Life, helping you to discover the very best of you.